turn to Ukraine. The Prime Minister has promised to give 6,000 more missiles to Ukraine, as well as an increase in funding. Olivia, do you think that we should be giving more? I know that, I noticed it's not necessarily linked, but I noticed that Rishi Sunak did not increase the defence budget in any way, although some members of the 1922 committee had said that he should have. Is our funding, our support, military support, about right?
I mean, it did seem slightly strange that he talks about all this statement as a war statement, and then there is no reference at all to defence spending. But to be fair, we are leading the way really in Europe on defence spending. We're still doing a bit better than Germany. I think we've probably got the balance about right. But we're all stretched here, so it's very hard to give as much as we would like to give. I think sort of trying to persuade other European countries that they need to do a little bit more, because it does feel as though Germany's finally catching up, but they've been underspending for a very long time. So I think we are doing what we can do, but to kind of put a little bit more political pressure on other European nations is probably the only way that we can help any more from now
on. Henry, what do you make about the reports that we heard this week about the Ukrainian army saying that they might be running out of weapons because they were going through, what was it now, the weaponry that would normally last 2 weeks in 20 hours. But and it's being effective. Clearly, they have managed to hold off the Russians much more in many parts of Ukraine than people had expected. So for the Ukrainians to win, for the Russians to lose, for the Russians to be ground down, we do need to keep giving them, or someone needs to keep giving them weaponry. So where do you think that should come from?
Well, I think it should come from us and from other NATO countries that are in a position to supply it. I mean, we're the one good piece of news is that the supply lines into Ukraine seem to work incredibly, and weaponry seems to get there fairly quickly. I mean, unless of course there's a Russian strike, which may complicate things. But I think that in terms of, is there any limitation on how much we're prepared to give? I mean, I don't think we're worried about our stocks falling particularly low. So I think effectively our willingness to contribute to this fight should be very, very large. And when you mentioned the Ukrainian army's claims about how much weaponry it's using, I think those things are very difficult to verify. We just in the fog of war, claims are made. Clearly there's a lobbying campaign by the Ukrainian government, which we support. And I think just as the casualty figures or equipment destroyed figures are not easy to verify, we can't really take them at face value. Precisely how much weaponry they're losing or using, we don't know. But I think the British political consensus is we should be doing everything we can, and it's hard to see how Russia can see it as a provocative act, as it would be for us to sort of fly in our own planes or something. So yeah, keep the trucks rolling.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, within that, I haven't really heard anyone express that, and there's nothing wrong with expressing it whatsoever. Is there a feeling that because the Ukrainians are in such a dire situation, that they're having to, what's the word? Not inflate, I don't know, say things are even worse than they are because they are so desperate for help. They feel that elements of the West have ignored them. They've ignored calls for a no-fly zone. They've ignored calls, for example, those Polish fighter jets. Do you think there's an element of that, Henry?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the claims around what was happening with nuclear plants were seen as alarmist. The impression was given that maybe Chernobyl was at imminent risk, and I think nuclear experts said, well, it's not quite that bad. I mean, that doesn't mean that the situation isn't incredibly bad. I just think that it's difficult for us to make policy on the outside, and despite the temptation of becoming a military expert on the conflict via Twitter alone, I'm trying to resist that and trying to say that it seems that we have good intelligence, good relationships, good dialogue at a sort of ministerial level with Ukraine. And I think that's where they'll understand the needs. I think, yes, certainly some of the Ukrainian government requests, like a no-fly zone, I think have been a bit unrealistic, and are more to sort of create a political groundswell in the West rather than really practical policy proposals.